and welcome to my channel. So today what we're going to be doing is going over a project from start to finish, and that is the initial idea or concept all the way to the final execution. So originally I had an idea for a different project, and I decided to incorporate it into our current project that we're working on as a demo. So the project I was thinking about I call it altered page, where we take old book pages and use them as our canvas for artwork. In this case right now we're doing a project I call Deck of Cards, where we're designing cards, like playing cards, so Ace of Spades, Ace of Diamonds, King of Hearts, so forth. And this was the original sketch that I came up with. So one of the things we talked about is the creative process, and the creative process starts off with brainstorming. So I had an idea. Now usually brainstorms, we write them out, and we try to narrow down what our idea is, but I already just had an idea that came into my head. So I'll go through that brainstorming process separately so you can see what it is. But this right here is my sketch, my rough draft that I'm looking at, and you can see some notes I have here. So wildflowers, limited muted colors, text, this again because it was going to be for a different page, and then I have the skull there. So from this, I sketched out this, and this is going to be the drawing that I'm going to use for the project. Now I made this stuff a little bit too wide, so when I transferred it to the final paper, I had to make some adjustments. So what I did, we just moved it around and had different parts, and you can see what it's going to look like right here. So for this project, again, this will be a card, and I'll be putting, I think Ace of Spades is what I'm going to go with, so that'll go right there, and then I'll have Ace of Spades at the bottom over here, and I'll add that at the end. This is the pencil drawing that I transferred over, and what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to ink this first in waterproof inks. And one thing I always suggest is always test your materials. There are some waterproof inks that aren't quite waterproof, and but I have some really good ones I can go over in a second. Now, one of the things I was a little bit frustrated with was I didn't quite know how I wanted to do the skull. And this is the thing I always recommend to anybody who's working on art, students or veteran artists. Always have a test sheet, something that you can work on, so when you're not quite sure how you want to approach it, you're not doing something for the first time on your final. So in this case, I didn't know how I wanted to render the skull. So I did a bunch of little skull drawings, and I did little pieces, and there's things that I like and dislike from all of these. So one of the things that I like this area right here. I thought this area was interesting. I absolutely did not like that area, and then this just didn't quite work out over here. And I started looking at different ways of rendering different sections, and I just kind of go and practice and see what I like, what I don't like, and what's going to happen is I'm going to take elements from each of these. But again, even after this, before I start inking that skull, I'm going to do a couple of warm-ups to get my hands loose and get myself mentally prepared for what I'm about to do. So these are all the things I'm going to be working on. Now, when I'm doing this on the video, it's going to be time-lapse, and what I'll do is I'll just do a voiceover over that. Alright, before I begin, there's a couple things I want to go over. I want to go over some of the inking materials that I'm going to use, just so you can see what they are. So, one of the things surprising that works really well are going to be these Univol Vision Fine. This is waterproof. I tested it out multiple times with watercolor to make sure that it doesn't bleed. But this has a nice flow on it, and when you're working on watercolor paper, especially watercolor paper that's textured, you want ink that will flow. Some of the other pens that you might use, like art pens, they can get stuck. You can get like little wobbly lines as it hits the texture, but this kind of just glides over everything. So for all my fine line stuff that I need to do, like this border that I'm going to be using with a ruler, and then some of these long stems I'm going to be using for the flowers, I'll use this pen. Now, for the details in the skull, in the ground, and some of the other parts of this, I'm going to be using a quill. So, this quill is a Ashikawa quill, and you can find this on Amazon. It comes with a recommended nib. I forget exactly what the nib is called, but if you were to go on Amazon, put the Tachikawa nib holder or pen holder, it's going to recommend you these nibs. So I use this to do a lot of the details. This gives me a lot of control in the fine work. But when I'm doing long lines like these borders, it's just easier to use the pen and the ruler. And the inks that I'll be using, in this case, I'm going to use the Liquitex Carbon Black. This one is really good. It's really black. A lot of times in school, you're going to get the cheaper India ink, and it comes out almost like a grayish color instead of a black. This comes out black. Some other inks that are really good that will come out black, and this one's also one of my favorites. It's the Doc Martens Black Star Waterproof Indian ink. This also comes out extremely black. And then the last one that I might use, Speedball Super Black. And the reason I have different brands is I like to try different inks out and see how they work. And in this case, the one I'm just going to use is the Liquitex, and I'm going to use a Liquitex because it has the dropper in here, which is going to make it easier to apply the ink, whereas I have to dip into this one. So if I'm using this, I'm probably going to ink with a brush instead of a quill. I can just dip the brush into the ink. So that's one of the main reasons I'm using this. It just makes it easier for the quill. So I'm going to get into inking, and I hope you enjoyed the video and learned something from it. Okay, so now that the inking process is done, it's time to prep this paper for painting. So I'm using watercolor paper. It is cold pressed, um, 150 pounds. It's not the thickest, but it's also not the thinnest. It's a student grade level. So I'm going to mount this onto the board, and then I'm going to put a wash of water on it. Um, the purpose of putting a wash of water on it is to make sure that the paint will flow over it. So the first step right now that I'm going to do really quickly, and I'll speed up the film too as I'm doing it, is I'm just going to mask off the main rectangle. And one of the things to keep in mind, even though I'm using painter's tape, it could still tear the paper. So what I want to do is de-tack it a bit. So I'll just de-tack it against my jeans. So I take that along my inked border, right? And I'm careful enough to where I can still see a little bit of the black. That means I'm going right up against the ink and I'm not going to get any white on the side. The other trick, and I have a tool for this, but most people don't have it, I just use the back end of the Sharpie to seal the tape down. So all you really need to do is take this rounded edge and just run it up, get rid of the air bubbles, and then really make sure that the tape has a nice seal along that edge. When we go to take the tape off, I'm going to show you a trick that I learned in college that prevents your paper from getting torn. Even though we de-tack this, tearing is still a possibility. So you never want to just take the tape off. What I'm going to use is a blow dryer, and I will heat up the tape, and that makes the glue a little bit more malleable. So it's not going to be quite as tacky, and that'll allow me to lift it off the paper. And quick side note, if you ever get a dish or a jar and there's a label and you want to get that label off of it, just run a blow dryer, heat it up, and then it'll come right off. So now it's time for a wash. So I'm just going to get a clean brush, some clean water, and I'm going to do just a little light brush. Just to kind of get the surface of the paper ready for painting. This is also why it's important that you're testing your inks before you paint to make sure that you have waterproof ink and that it actually legitimately is waterproof and not just kind of sort of maybe waterproof. When you do this, make sure there's no puddling of water. What we're just doing is moistening the paper, and that's just going to allow the paint to flow over it when we start. Now at this point, I need to wait for this to dry to where it's just a little bit cool to the touch. If it feels like the normal paper when you touch it, it's going to be completely dry. If it's cool to the touch, it's dry, but it's not completely dry. And that means you can paint nicely on it, but you don't have to worry about the paint bleeding into areas you don't want it to go into. The other nice thing about inking and using watercolor is that ink will help you act as a natural barrier. So if you're painting, it'll help prevent that paint from seeping over to the other side and going into your other color, which is just a bleed. And so we'll come back to this in about 10 or 15 minutes while that just sets up, and then we'll start painting. Okay, so it's been about 10 minutes. I'm touching my paper just to check. So I have a nice cool touch to the paper, meaning There's still some moisture on the paper, but it's not damp and nothing will bleed. And while I did that, what I did was I mixed my color. Now, I don't need a whole lot of blue. I want this to be fairly light, and I want it more of a blue-gray to the background. So I'm going to be using some brighter colors, some like yellowish oranges, some violets and red violets. And I didn't want a color that would compete with it, so I'm going to do like a light blue wash. And while I'm doing that, I just test and test, and I figure out, okay, what's the blue that I want? So I always have these test strips, right? And these test strips are just for me to check colors, see what I want, and to get those values down. So I like that value right there. In some areas, I might need to add more water. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind while we're painting. Always have some kind of test strip just to wipe excess paint off on your brush and to see what the value is before you go to your paper. Second thing is, I'm right-handed, so I want to start left and work my way down to the right. This way that ensures my hand doesn't go into wet paint and then transfer somewhere else and create a mess. So these are things that you have to think about before you start painting. Which direction are you going? Now, normally I like to do flat washes, but it's not going to be possible with this because I have so many little details. So when I approach this, I'm going to take these natural sections as kind of like little breaks. As long as I can keep my values consistent, everywhere like a section of white is chunked off by black ink. That's like a little resting area or an area where I don't have to like rush while I'm blending. Because the one thing that watercolors will do is they will dry on you fairly quickly, especially when you're just kind of doing a nice little wash on this. And then I have a lot of details, and I want to make sure that I avoid going into the flowers or these little flower buds that I drew here. The skull, enough is easy to avoid. It has a dark outline, and the ground's going to be painted in after its top part dries. So I'm just going to begin, and at this point, I'll speed through the process with the filming. All right, so I finished doing the backdrop layer and the ground layer. And a couple things to note, there were times in between the two layers. So after I painted the top layer blue, walked away, let it dry, let it dry. If you don't have enough time or you get impatient, you can give it about 20-30 minutes and then use a blow dryer to finish it off. In this case, I just went and watched a TV show. Then I laid in the bottom part, but this is where I wanted to show the trick that I mentioned earlier. So I have a blow dryer, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to heat up this tape. And by heating up the tape, I'm going to make the glue become inert, so to speak. So it's not going to be as sticky. It's going to release from the paper. There are a couple of things that you got to keep in mind. One, you don't want to hold the gun down, right, in one spot because it'll melt the glue onto the paper. And then the second part is you don't want to just work your way down because this part of the tape will be cold. So what you want to do is you want to heat up the tape, and then after you heat up the tape, you're just going to go to the top and you're going to rock it back and forth. So that's one way to remove the tape, and I'm going to do that next. Alright, there you go. The tape is removed. There are no tears. There's no leftover glue. A couple of things. If you do accidentally have some leftover glue on it, you can take some of the tape you just removed and you can just tack at it, and that'll lift it up. A lot of times you could also use a eraser. So just use like a Mars eraser or rubber eraser, and then you can rub that off. That'll also help lift off that glue. But if you use the rocking method, the chances of that happening are very slim. But that is the key to getting nice clean edges with tape, masking, and then not tearing your paper. Alright, so I'm in the next phase. I'm going to go in and do these little flower buds right here. And what I mixed is I mixed the golden yellow with a little bit of orange, and that gave me that color right there. And what that's going to look like against that blue is going to be here. So I wanted something that would stand out and have a warm intensity to it, but not quite bright as yellow. So there are like the Yemen yellow, which is a lot brighter, but the value is not as dark. With the golden yellow, I get a much darker value, and then with the orange, I give it that kind of like honey gold color. So that's what I'm going to do in all of these little buds, and I'm just going to, again, work my way over. And I'm going to do it slowly. I'm going to use a much smaller brush, and the important thing is to not lose patience and just take your time. Alright, so I finished painting that part. If you, by chance, happen to miss something while you're painting, fight the temptation to go across it and add whatever you missed. Because chances are you're going to set your hand down and you'll just mess up all the work that you've done. It's better just to wait for it to dry, go back, look, see if you missed anything, and then go back in and paint afterwards. So I'm going to let this one sit 10-15 minutes, hit it with the blow dryer, make sure that it is perfectly dry before moving on to the flowers. And then once the flowers are done, I will finish off with the ace and the spade. So now that that golden yellow color layer is dry, I'm going to go in and I'm going to start painting the flowers. So I've already mixed my color, and you can see the various colors that I tried to mix. I'm going to go through with a very light version of the color that I want. And what I'm basically going to do is 2 different washes over the flowers, and that's going to give me a little bit of depth, a little bit more control over the values. So the first wash is going to be a nice light wash, and then I'll come through with the darker version of that color layer just to add some layers, textures, visual interest, things like that. All right, so this brings this illustration to the end. You can see that it was done in multiple layers, in multiple phases. One of the things I really want to get across is planning and preparation. Now, there are people that can go right to a final project, start it, finish it, and they're just good to go. Other people like me, I like to prepare and plan. I like to practice. If I'm doing something and I don't quite know how I want to execute it, again, I will practice and practice and practice until I get to a direction that I'm happy with. So hopefully you learned a few things during the video, and if you're getting into watercolor, I hope you can have some fun with it. So until next time, this is Mr. Aguilar, your art teacher.